So what happens when you try to put together a fantasy dream team? That's what I try to do in this video, and the results may surprise you. So stick around to the end of the video to see how this all goes. Also, if you want to see me do a part 2 to this video next season, where I do the entire second round, leave a like on this video. If this video gets to 100 likes, I'll do this again next year. But for those of you who clicked on this video and don't know what fantasy is, I'll give you a quick rundown. But if you do know what's going on, click at the timestamp above to get to the rest of the video. But for those who don't know what fantasy is all about, fantasy football is basically a game where you set up a team based on different positions, and each of those positions get different scoring. So take wide receiver for example. In a PPR league, a reception is worth 1 point, and every 10 yards that receiver gets is 1 point. A touchdown for that receiver, either receiving or rushing, would be 6 points in most leagues. If they for some reason throw a touchdown, it would be worth 4 points. There's a lot of other different scoring rules for all the different positions in fantasy football, but I'm not going to get into all that because it gets really complex. But just understand, the points these players score are based on their real life performances week by week, and your team will get a total amount of points based on the players you start. That is the overall rundown of fantasy football. I'm not sure I explained that well enough, but hopefully you get the gist of it. But let me explain the rules of this challenge. So what I can do is I have the entire first round to draft any player I want. However, I'm limited to certain position caps. I can only draft 1 quarterback, 3 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 kicker, and 1 defense. And I am only limited to 1 waiver claim a week. Everyone else has the rest of the draft to build their team, and trades are allowed through the entire season up until the playoffs. But if anyone other than me wins the championship this season, they get $50, so I better not lose. But now it's time for me to select my team. Who do I think is on the dream team, and will this team be successful? Well, the first pick was the consensus #1 pick in every single fantasy draft. It was Christian McCaffrey.
No! 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 No!
Next was the first wide receiver, Tyreek Hill. I then followed that up with CeeDee Lamb. Then as I was debating on what wide receiver I should select next, I decided to go with my second running back, Bijan Robinson. I finally decided on my next receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Then I selected Breece Hall as my last running back. I now had all my skill positions filled out. Now I needed to fill out QB, tight end, kicker, and defense. For my QB, I decided to select Josh Allen because I figured he'd have a nice combination of passing touchdowns and rushing touchdowns. Selecting my tight end was difficult, but I decided to go with Sam Laporta because I thought this Lions offense would be really good. For my kicker, I decided on Brandon Aubrey. Why not Justin Tucker? Well, vibes. I don't know. I just figured Aubrey would be better. For my last pick, I selected the Ravens. They were a good defense in 2023. I figured that would continue. So with my draft done, the rest of the league started their draft. And while that was going on, I selected random players to keep the draft going.
I'm retiring.
With the draft done, it was now time to finalize this team. So I made a few cuts, added a few players, and now we're ready for
49ers standout running back Christian McCaffrey is out tonight.
So of course I won week 1, but yeah, Christian McCaffrey didn't play, and we didn't know until the day of, so I couldn't just swap in Zeke. But at least Aubrey just decided to drop 20 points for some reason, so there's that. So, I lost? Yeah, thanks Josh Allen for scoring 8 points. And apparently he just had all the good players this week. I mean, I had good players myself, but Sam Laporta has done absolutely nothing for me all season. I'm actually a little bit worried. I might lose again.
To get him touches, it's a screen pass. He route, that's a backwards pass. Gotta be careful, it's picked up.
Since there's a lot of weeks in the NFL season, I'm going to simplify things a little bit. Week 3, I get carried by Josh Allen and Brandon Aubrey. In week 4, I lost to the auto draft team. Bro had Devontae Adams, who didn't even play, and I still lost. Week 5, I lose to T. Higgins, and I attempt to make a big trade. I'm not even sure I make the playoffs unless something changes soon. Finally won a game by a decent amount. Like, I finally scored over 160 since what? Week 1? I actually didn't score over 160 in week 1. But Cole Kmet, I had the genius move of starting a player against the Jaguars because their defense sucks. The trade didn't go through the first time, but I got re-offered the trade. I didn't accept the trade because Tyreek did well, and then he scored me 2 points in week 7. But I still did win week 7 and week 8. My team got hot, but my opponent's teams were hotter.
What?
Week 9, I got dominated by the number 1 team because of J.K. Dobbins, Garrett Wilson, and Ramondre Stevenson. But at least I'm going to get CMC back. Week 10, Christian McCaffrey did not help, and I got dominated by Jamar Chase. But at least I finally have a good game in week 11. Now we're in the final push to the playoffs, but week 12 was not a good start because Sam Darnold was my only good player this week. Week 13 was much better. I got revenge on the auto draft team, and I made a change at tight end. Also, my playoff chances were looking very good. Yeah, there's a 0% chance of me falling out of the playoffs. So I'm going into the playoffs with a massive boom. Josh Allen, win off. My receivers, win off. Tyreek Hill did not have a bad game this time. And first week of the playoffs, I match up against the same exact guy. And Josh Allen had yet another big game. My running backs didn't. Amon-Ra did, and so did the rest of my receivers, except Tyreek Hill. You know, I might just bench him. Look at my tight end, Jonnu Smith, clutch pickup of the week, even though Laporta finally had a decent game. Anyways, who do I match up against? Duderex, who has a pretty good team, but I'm very beatable. Brock Bowers scares me, though. He scares me a lot. He's going to have such a big game against the Jaguars. This was the only semifinal game I won this entire week. Bijan did well, Amon-Ra did well, CeeDee Lamb got injured, and Xavier Worthy is finally having some decent games. Yeah. I just can't win a championship this year. This guy legit beat me in every single playoff matchup I played against him. Like, look, my team did good for the most part, and then my Aubrey and defense sold. It doesn't help his defense scored 21 points. Unfortunate end to the season, but were my draft picks any good? Starting with my quarterback, Josh Allen was a very good pick. He ended up being the number 2 quarterback overall, and he did end up having a good combination of both passing and rushing touchdowns. Next are my running backs, and that's where my biggest regret lies. Starting with Christian McCaffrey. He barely played and was rated number 67 overall. Not worth the first overall pick. Next is Breece Hall, who was also incredibly mediocre for a first-round running back. Only running back 16, and there are 32 starting running backs in the NFL, so with that, he's a mid-tier starter, not a first-round pick you'd want to have. The only good running back I selected was Bijan Robinson, who ended up being the number 3 overall running back, so this was a very good choice. However, he's one of 3 running backs. Better running backs include Jahmyr Gibbs and Saquon Barkley, who were both second-round running backs. Next were my wide receivers, who fared much better than my running backs. Starting with my first pick, not as good as the others. only 18 overall. Was very shaky in the middle of the season because he was missing his starting quarterback, but ended up playing much better towards the end of the season. Next is CeeDee Lamb, who was wide receiver 5. A very good pick despite missing their starting quarterback for most of the season. Lastly is Amon-Ra St. Brown, a pick I debated between several other wide receivers but eventually settled on Amon-Ra, who ended up being wide receiver 3. However, the other options I debated ended up being even better. Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Jamar Chase killed me in a fantasy matchup, and Justin Jefferson ended up not being in a bad situation like I thought he'd be. The guy I tried to trade for, Brian Thomas, ended up being wide receiver 4, so I should have taken that trade when it was reoffered to me. Next is my tight end, Sam Laporta, who was a massive disappointment for me this season. Even though he finished as tight end number 8, he was pretty bad for most of the season in fantasy. Most of those points ended up coming at the end of the season, on my bench. The tight end I ended up picking up was Jonnu Smith, who ended up being tight end 4. He came alive at the right time for me. However, better tight ends include the rookie sensation, Brock Bowers, George Kittle, and the other previous rookie sensation, Trey McBride. Next is my kicker, Brandon Aubrey, who ended up being kicker 2. However, he had his worst game at the worst possible time, which did not help things at all. He was most certainly better than Justin Tucker, who ended up being kicker 10. However, he only trailed Chris Boswell as the top kicker. Lastly is my defense, which is not even on my team anymore. I ended up dropping them halfway through the season because they were not that good. I ended up picking the Steelers defense, who was the number 4 overall defense, and still sold me the championship. There were also other defenses that were better, such as the Broncos defense, surprisingly, the Vikings defense, and the Packers defense. None of them I expected to be any good. And as you could see by all of the rankings, I didn't draft a single player that was at the top of their position. Some got close, but not number 1. And I didn't win the championship because of it. Maybe the second round will be kinder to me.